Hello everyone. My name is Charmaine Magnani, and I'm a senior researcher at Includovate. Thank you so much for joining us in this webinar today on inclusive behavior change. This is hosted as part of the Includovate Thought Series that has been running since the 30th of January of this year. Joining us today on our panel, we have Dr. Caleb Kebene, Dr. Sujata Ganjuli, and Kanika Josh. I'll give them a moment to introduce themselves and their research interests before we get into the main agenda for the day. Sujata, you can start.
Hi, Sujata. You might be on mute.
You are on mute.
Sorry. Hello, everyone. I'm Sujata. I'm based in India. I'm working as South Asia Gender Equality and Social Inclusion Lead with Includovate. And yes, my research interest is like working in the field of gender, social inclusion, and also definitely I have worked a lot on behavior change. So that's the topic for today's webinar. Thank you. Over to you, Caleb.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Caleb Haile. I'm a principal researcher at Includovate. I'm mainly involved in working on research and evaluation projects. Today, I want to talk about the nexus between climate risks and behavior. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kanika Joshi. I work as the head of partnerships and communications for Includovate. I have been researching a lot in and around youth inclusion and women empowerment in the past few years, and really looking forward to speaking about the role of ICT and how that influences behavior change. Thanks.
Thank you so much, everyone. To kickstart our presentation, we have Dr. Sujata, and she's going to speak on her experience around social behavior and social and behavior change communication campaigns. Thank you, Sujata. You can take the floor.
Thanks, Charmaine. Yes, this is really an interesting topic to discuss. The topic of today's webinar, as we know, that it's inclusive behavior change. And these are the three big heavy words actually, because and if we start to do the autopsy of these three words, then inclusive, yes, this is what we have been discussing throughout, because this is the 5th webinar, and in all our webinars, we have actually talked about gender inclusion, ethnicity inclusion, disability inclusion in governance, as well as unpacking what the theory behind social inclusion. So like whatever the program interventions are, whatever the policies are, so these all should be inclusive. That means leaving no one behind. And the next word, yes, behavior. That's really complex and complicated because we deal with human beings. And I will explain why I'm saying that it's complex and complicated, because with two examples, we all know smoking is injurious to health. We have those horrible pictures of our lungs in the pack as pack warnings, but people who smoke, they will buy the packets, look at those pictures, still smoke. So it's really difficult to see how we can actually change the behavior of the people. Also, we know that helmets are important. It's for our own safety, but we don't use helmet. And also when we go out, we try to look for the traffic police where he is standing so that we can escape from giving fine. So more than our life, we are mainly concerned about not paying the fine or money. So that's the reason, like I say, human behavior is so complex and complicated. And then, yes, the change. So I have used this word quite frequently. So what we want is not a temporary change. We need a sustainable change, so that even after any program intervention is over, that change should continue. So how, so in this case, how do the communication campaigns, they play an important role in bringing about this inclusive behavior change? So on the basis of my past experience in different projects, dealing with these communication campaigns, so we worked with mass media, mid media, as well as interpersonal communications. So by mass media, we mean the use of television, radio, mid media, that is the street theaters, and also the interpersonal communication through the frontline health workers. So this particular project was on maternal child health. And yes, apart from these, there were mobile van campaigns, there were mobile based interventions, wherein the target audience would get a phone call, and then the message would be displayed, and then the women could hear it, or whoever receives it. So and also there were interventions based on like the listeners group, and so there were different channels used. So now the question arises, why so many campaigns together in a project? So the answers can be many, but I will mainly highlight two. The first is the 360-degree approach. Because if you hear any message one time, then you may or may not register. But if you hear the same message or the related messages from more than one channel, then you start thinking that why am I hearing it repeatedly? So maybe it like initiates the change. You start thinking, then it can reflect in your attitude, and then it can reflect in your behavior. So these many communication campaigns, it's really important, and it really reinforces the message that we want to convey to the people. And another reason why so many channels, because yes, that's the main theme of the webinar, to make it inclusive. We talked about television, we talked about radio, we talked about mobile. So not everyone is having access to these. For example, if you talk about for women, they may not have access to mobile phones. If we talk about the TV, the radio, like for example, women, for example, they may not get access, even if it's there in the household, they may not get access throughout the day, or to watch it in front of the other male member. So there are different complications associated to this. So to make it inclusive, they definitely will have access to the street theaters. So the messages can be conveyed via that. They may have access to the mobile vans, the campaigns that are displayed via mobile vans, or even they have access to the frontline health workers. So if not television, radio, mobile, they have other access. So we are not leaving anyone from getting the benefit of the program. So that's another reason that there are many channels that can be used for this the campaigns. But how do these communication campaigns actually bring about the behavior change? So there needs to be a, like, we need to do a really good homework before we get into these communication campaigns. Like, we need to know the needs of the people. We need to have this mobile landscaping. What is the usage of the mobile in the target audience? What is the time slot that is most preferred by the women, for example, during which time we can actually broadcast the advertisement conveying our message? We need to know similarly for the radio slots, when like the women are actually tuning in to hear the different programs. So we need to really know these information. And yes, when a woman gets the message via mobile, so that really should motivate her to have this spousal communication, so that like whatever she hears, that should instigate a discussion with the husband. when the frontline health workers visit the household, so the frontline health worker not only targets the women in the reproductive age group, for example, but also the husbands, the mothers-in-law. So it actually initiates a discussion in the household. So the messages that are conveyed through these communication campaigns that actually support the frontline health workers. So that actually like people can actually validate the information. Oh yes, I have heard from that campaign, and now I'm hearing it from the frontline health worker as well. And it actually works across different levels, like the what we call a sociological model, that at the individual level it increases the knowledge, it increases the efficacy of the individual. Then it increases the interpersonal communication at the household level, and then definitely strikes the right chord, that is the social norms, to bring about the change in the community and the society. So this interplay actually helps to bring about the behavior change. And yes, it's all about connecting to the people. Unless and until the communication campaigns connect with the people, it won't be able to bring about a behavior change. And yes, there are different ways where by which we can actually evaluate the changes, this behavior change, like the knowledge attitude practice is the common approach. But there are different permutation combinations to it. It's a bit complicated, so we really need to understand the nuances and then get into like what exactly the communication campaigns have done in order to bring about the behavior change. So I end here with on a lighter note, that in fact from the COVID-19, what we learned is that it did not discriminate among people. It has just included everyone. It has treated everyone equally. So who are we to treat people differently, right? So it should be inclusive. So this is just the positive learning from COVID-19. Thank you. I stop here.
Thank you so much, Sujata. As she has rightly pointed out, the coining word is inclusion. So this actually highlights the importance of strategies and interventions in behavior change, but also paying detail to the context to ensure that everyone is included. In this case, that women are also included in these interventions. So through use of media, not only using media that is only accessible to a certain population, but is inclusive to everyone. Thank you so much, Sujata. And now we will hear from Kanika, who is addressing behavior change through tapping ICT and use of a case study from India. You're welcome, Kanika.
Am I unmuted and can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. So I'll just briefly touch upon, again, completely giving reflections to what Sujata also mentioned, inclusive behavior change, and basically just talking about how can one leverage ICT. So Sujata has already touched upon how behavior change campaigns are important and what all factors and what all methodologies can be used to kind of bring about behavior change. And I'll basically be touching upon the role of ICT in that landscape. So we all keep hearing that social media and communications has been really changing the way things are in society in terms of being a driver for social responsibility, for behavior change, and influencing basically the existing norms that we have as individuals, organizations, or corporations. And in years to come, it's safe to say that it will basically just be growing more. So when we talk about ICT, as Sujata also rightly touched upon, we basically are talking about all means of communication, which technology can be used and leveraged for. So that can include mobile phones, computers, radio, television, even social media and web apps that we all keep relying on. In terms of inclusion, I think, like Charmaine also basically touched upon, it's basically that we now see that ordinary people like you and me are now even more connected, right? And technology has extremely empowered everyone, giving everyone a voice. At the same time, we also see that there's a digital divide, that there are several people for which ensuring that we communicate and disseminate information through technology is a very strategic step, and we need to ensure that we're including them. For example, women in rural parts who do not have access to technology. Then even with behavior change, it's a very interesting thing, because we see that there are several indicators that actually influence in understanding behavior in the ICT world. Now, I keep working on communication campaigns for Includovate, and I think it's safe to say that anyone really needs to understand what are the indicators behind behind ensuring that information that you disseminate is actually tapped on as a behavior change, and gives that slight nudge to everyone to become an adopter for the advice or awareness campaigns that everyone launches. So some indicators, I think, which are playing globally, universally, are these that I've listed. So one could be choice overload. So it's said that there was this social experiment done by psychologists where they had a supermarket store selling jams. So in one day they sold like 24 jams, and the other they sold 6 jams. They noticed that when they were selling 24, there were several people coming to the counter tasting the jams, but the sales were actually tenfold with the time when the social experiment had like 6 jams on the counter. So this conversation is way more than jams, because it basically shows that humans have a tendency to be overwhelmed by choice overload. Looking at the Netflix homepage or any social media or any dinner menu can be like an easy example that all of us go through. And ensuring that we give limited choices that one can take from pick from, which are also suitable, is one thing using which we can ensure that the choice overload does not come in as a factor. Then social norms is something Sujata already touched upon, and it basically just shows that we are all heavily influenced by the perception of what others are doing. In India, there's a really common saying that that parents keep telling their children that, what if your friends jump off the bridge, will you jump off the bridge too? And it shows that and the saying in itself is not only India and parents to youth specific, but it also shows that everyone, like even adults, are heavily influenced by their peers. Even adults are heavily influenced by the perceptions of what people do. So social norms also have a huge role to play in terms of understanding behavior. Then also limited attention as an indicator is extremely important. We usually see that we usually keep hearing everyone saying, I keep saying that I multitask, but what does it mean to multitask, right? It basically shows that to understand behavior, we need to ensure that everyone has like a particular goal in place, because there's hardly you can only hack and like tap onto one activity at a time. So even understanding our ability to pay attention to several things all at once is a very important indicator for us to understand that element. Then identity is also a very crucial role. We actually see there are studies done again where we see that race has a huge role to play. So uh, sometimes negatively, sometimes positively. Positively when someone gets a progressive reservation, or negatively when doctors in there was a small study done by Indiana University where they found that doctors in the United States are actually prescribing more painkillers to people who come from a black race than the ones who come from a white race. And that basically is like a stereotype threat that even the doctors who are like professionally qualified have. So identity also has multiple roles to play in terms of perceptions and choices. Loss aversion is also a universal indicator of determining behavior, because most humans are seen to be loss averse. So this is to say that they are okay with the possibility of a win uh, twice as much as they want to lose. Then planning fallacy is something I think every working professional definitely faces, is that we all tend to be, as humans, overly optimistic about our ability to finish tasks on time. And we constantly believe that as the plan unfolds, we will be able to meet the deadline. But it is shown that we are at most times not able to understand, complete seemingly very simple tasks in the amount of time that we initially allocate. Of course, all of these indicators are in our control, and that is exactly how ICT world also plays out in understanding behavior. So now I'll just move upon a case study in which I was a researcher on, to again highlight all these points a little more. So the study was done in Dominican Republic, India, and Philippines to basically understand if rule of thumb trainings can actually foster behavioral change in peri-urban women entrepreneurs. And it was a simple randomized control trial where we found out that when we did classroom trainings in Dominican Republic, the classroom trainings were not as effective as in-person trainings. So again showing like a behavioral component, apart from other indicators, that people have more attention span when they're taught something individually and given personal attention as opposed to given group attention. In the phase 2 of this research, we actually did roll out the intervention through using a mobile phone, again using ICT to basically see how can it tap onto behavior change. And it was done in several phases, but in one of the phases we found out that when we send out messages which are easy to understand, simple to follow, it's way easier for our respondents to tap to basically change their behavior, as opposed to when they're given something in a very instructive manner, or when they're not given advice which is colloquial. So rather than sending like complicated messages like debit, like using terms like debit and credit when we to design solutions for financial literacy, we actually gave them an extremely easy one word, like one sentence kind of an advice of, you know what, keep true drawers separate in business and household. So another thing I think I did not touch upon is that this was done in peri-urban India in the phase that I was a part of. And we noticed that just by sending simple rule of thumb messages via mobile phone, sending visual aids which can be appealing, we saw that 2 to 8% of our control of our treatment population, treatment in randomized control trials is basically this the population which gets a training, as opposed to the control group which did not get the training. We saw that they had 2 to 8% better financial management practices by the end of the research and in some times to come. And we also noticed that sending messages and like advices, tapping into behavior change using ICT is actually 67% cheaper for micro financial institutions as opposed to other means of communication and information dissemination. Something I think the main key learning from this was that for ensuring tapping behavior change, we need to ensure that the content that we send out is easy, it's colloquial, it's not instructive, and it's anecdotal to ensuring that people understand what we're sending out. So localization of context is very important. And with this, I think I will wrap up my presentation just by saying that we need ICT to basically ensure that we know ICT is already playing like a pivotal role in how we determine social behavior and societal behavior change. And ICT's importance will only keep growing from now on. So it's really important for us to determine our clear intentions, actions to ensure that the effectiveness of basically all the behavior change information and awareness campaigns that go out. Thanks, Charmaine, over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Kanika. What comes out is that essentially behavior change is complex. What works in situation A may not work in situation B. Therefore, there is need to invest time in understanding behavior change so that we come up with appropriate interventions in different contexts. And also to ensure that in using ICT, we actually are not creating a gap in which other people get excluded as well. So we need to pay attention to this digital divide that can actually come up through use of ICT. Thank you so much, Kanika. Now we're going to shift the lens towards something, well, still inclusive behavior change, but slightly different from what Kanika and Sujata have been talking about. Khalib is going to speak on the nexus between behavior change and climate risks. Thank you, Khalib.
Thank you, Charmaine. Let me share my screen. Okay, can you see me now? Good, thank you so much. So, yeah, thank you, Sujata and Kanika. And now I will just try to describe how climate risks induce behavior change. Basically, the previous panelists have spoke or talked about how ICT and other communication tools induce behavior change. Now I'm trying to build the concept of behavior formation through the environmental aspects or the environmental factors. Mainly, it's been studied extensively that households in sub-Saharan Africa are exposed to the vagaries of climate. So that mainly because their livelihood depends on agriculture, and the kind of agriculture is rain-fed, which means it directly depends on the weather. So this kind of dependence, or this kind of dependence on climate, it has implications on how they will behave in order to respond or in order to cope with the frequent and sometimes prolonged climate risks. Of course, climate risks like floods and droughts have direct effects by causing loss of human lives. But now here I'm trying to, I will talk about how these climate risks, mainly through the effects on their income, will bring changes in their production and consumption decisions. To just give you some background, in the context of sub-Saharan Africa, here mainly I have studied the context of Ethiopia, the credit and insurance markets are lacking. So it means households try to accommodate their household needs, that means their consumption, from what they produce. It means it's not possible for them to buffer the effects of climate risks by accessing credits or by accessing insurance markets. So what they will do is they will try to self-insure by shifting their current production in a safe but less profitable choices. This has implications on their income. The other thing is the interaction of climate risks with the socio-cultural factors like gender biases, for instance. I have a diagram which I want to discuss the two aspects. That means the effects on their income and how they will try to cope with that, and how socio-cultural factors or social behavior in general, social norms, interact with climate risks have been a focus of research. I hope you can see this diagram. Up to now, all my research works somehow fit with this diagram. It's my own representation of how climate risks, it starts with affecting their income. Like I have mentioned it earlier, it's about loss of crop or livestock, and this has implications on their income, the income they can generate. So when households face risk-induced income loss, if they have access to credit or insurance, it might be easier for them to buffer or to cope with the effects of climate risks. But if they don't have access to those kinds of markets, what they would do is, in the first side around here, what they will do is just they will change their intra-household resource allocation. It means the amount of expenditures on education and food they need to adjust based on the little income they have. Here, the social behavior interacts with this low income they have in that production year where climate shocks have happened. The social behavior could be here gender bias, for instance. In one of my studies, I investigated that in the presence of gender bias, households tend to prefer the health and education of boys rather than girls. What it means is that mainly because in agrarian economies, boys and men they have comparative advantage because most of the agricultural practice demand, physical ability. This induces households to protect the health, and mainly the food consumption and the health expenditures will divert from female or from girls to boys. In that sense, this has a direct effect on their human capital accumulation or human capital formation. In the long run, what it means is that these female children either will marry early, or they will have low socioeconomic status in the future, which means low income generating capacity. And we know from other studies that female or women with lower economic status or with low education and low income tend to have, with children with low food security and nutrition status and children with low education. So this is an intergenerational poverty transmission. It starts from a climate risk at one season, but it extends, or it will have long-lasting effect by transferring or by inducing feminized poverty. The other channel could be how farmers choose their production, what kind of crops they are intending to produce, or what kind of inputs they want to use. So farmers' behavior, Kanika earlier mentioned about loss aversion. Here I want to, in other side, I want to talk about the risk aversion or risk-taking behavior. It has a similar connotation. Risk-taking behavior means when farmers are operating in an environment which is harsh, that means in the presence of frequent droughts and floods, what they will try to do is, if they don't have access to credit and insurance markets, they will try to pick the kind of varieties or the kind of inputs that will have lower loss if that kind of risks happen. So this preference towards low risk, low return practices will directly reduce their possibility of generating higher income. So this cycle of poverty will continue. There are climate risks. Farmers will prefer low risk, low return agricultural activities. They will get low income, so they will be trapped in this vicious cycle of poverty. The other side is just trying to look at the climate change and adaptation. We know that farmers which are poor and vulnerable, they will try to minimize the effects of climate change by just sticking to, like I mentioned it earlier, with a kind of varieties with lower return, but at the same time with lower risks. What it means here is that some of the climate change adaptation and mitigation practices require patience. That means it might not result immediate economic returns. They might invest on those practices now, but they cannot get the economic returns right away or within 1 or 2 seasons. So for poor farmers, this kind of time preference doesn't exist. That means that they are present biased in a way. They try to get the income or the food right away. So the climate change adaptation and mitigation practices sometimes might not be feasible for poor and vulnerable households. In this case, climate policies like market-based or incentive-based climate policies might help farmers to invest on this kind of farmers. Generally, this framework is trying to establish, in the presence of frequent and prolonged climate risks, farmers will tend to choose such coping and adaptive practices that can minimize the loss from the climate risks. But these kind of choices are not always optimal, because in the long run, it will affect their ability to generate sustainable and higher income. So this is the general framework and my topic here. The issue of social behavior or gender bias, social norms generally, can be an interesting point of interaction with the climate change induced low income. So thank you so much, and back to you, Charmaine.
Thank you so much, Khalib. So if I understand well and try to simplify your framework, I'm understanding that these climate risks that affect farmers differently. So it endangers livelihoods differently. And also there's differentiated responses from farmers on these climate risks. So now comes the issue of behavior change, like how are farmers going to cope or adapt to these climate risks? So I think that's what I took from the framework that you just shared. Thank you so much, Khalil. So now I'm going to present some questions to the panelists in terms of what they presented to us. I will start with Sujata. For Sujata, your question is, how do we make the communication campaigns inclusive? I know you already talked about this, but I just need you to perhaps re-emphasize so that we take something away in terms of the inclusion part that we are all about. Thank you, Sujata.
Thanks, Charmaine. Yeah, I mean, this is really interesting. Like we talk about the communication campaigns, but how do we make it inclusive? So for that matter, like we need to do the user test. So if here I will be taking example of agriculture, like sitting in the meeting room, we try to decide what the farmers need. So we prepare the brochures and we think that we know best and we know what they need. So, but when we really go to the field to test those brochures or any communication campaigns, so there we understand that we are wrong. If we have included XYZ in the brochure, maybe when we go to the field, the farmers may ask us to drop Y and add ABC, because that's what they want to know. That's where they're facing problem with. So these are the things that really matters, that really, like, as I said, the communication campaign should connect with the people. And when we do the user test, it also like the farmers, for example, they get the ownership of those campaigns or the materials. So I will share one example. Soil health card is the central government's initiative in India. And we wanted to understand to what extent the farmers use and understand the soil health card. So when we went to the field, and it was in Bihar, that's one of the states in India, in the eastern part. So we realized that people don't understand much what the soil health card is all about. So we had requested that we will be having some group discussions, and that the farmers should come with the soil health card. So what they told us during the meeting, during the discussion, that you know what, we got this card and we had kept it in a box in some corner of the house, and we were told that you want to see those cards, so we just got it. we don't know what's there in it. So because that's not self-explanatory. So there was like number of iterations, and then we came up with some graphics and a good looking soil health card, and we thought that yes, this is the best one, because we have discussed this with the farmers, and then we have put our own ideas, and we had the designer with us. And then when we thought that maybe we can, because we wanted to make it inclusive, so like, so that, and self-explanatory, that people, whether a person can read or write or not, like they should be understanding the soil health card with just a look. So we thought that, okay, if the nitrogen level is good, so we do a thumbs up, and if it's not, we do it thumbs down. So when we took that version of the design to the farmers, so to our surprise, that was interpreted entirely in a different manner. The farmers thought that if it's a thumbs up, that means we need to increase the level of nitrogen in the soil. And we were like, no, that's totally wrong interpretation. That means it won't work. The thumbs up and down won't work. So then we again try to understand what exactly. So it required actually a number of visits to the villages, to different villages, to understand and talk with people of different age group, of with men, women, people who could read and write, who couldn't, the big farmers, the marginal farmers, everyone, to understand like what should be there in the soil health card to make it self-explanatory, and so that it's like people can understand they should be using it. So yes, in this way we really need to understand that what we think is different from what the needs are. And also whenever we work on the brochures, so we think that yes, it should be in Hindi, for example, and we should be using like every single word in Hindi, and we shouldn't be using any English word. But when we went to the field to test that, we realized that the Hindi word of hybrid, like we wanted to use the hybrid seed. So people were not able to understand the Hindi word, because the English word hybrid is more common there as compared to the Hindi word. So there are certain English words which is more common. I mean, people use it frequently. So these are the things, like it really matters to go and meet the people for whom we are working, whether it's the farmers or women in the reproductive age group, to anyone, like to really make it inclusive, so that they should be benefited with these communication materials. And definitely, and then only it will connect to people, they will have the ownership, and there will be behavior change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sujata. You're highlighting a very important aspect of research and working with communities, that we need to use participatory approaches in order to foster behavior change amongst the people that we are working with, because we cannot just come with a blueprint and expect that it's going to work. It doesn't work that way. Thank you so much. Also, to say to our attendees, can you also pose your questions in the provided question and answer chat in the meantime? And before I leave Sujata, someone else has actually posed a question that is specific to what you've been addressing. So the question is, could you please elaborate how much time it takes to change the behavior through the social behavior change communication campaigns?
That's really an interesting question, and a difficult one as well, because that's what we have been discussing, that human behavior is complex. And but yes, these communication campaigns really can at least start to make the people think that which is the right way, because we don't really expect people to just immediately change their behavior after watching that particular campaign. It takes time. It may and that's the reason, like I talked about different campaigns, like the 360-degree approach, at least to fasten that process. So there isn't any thumb rule for that, that yes, this is the particular period, but at least, yes, at least at least 1 year or something, like, because it's really complicated to say that yes, exactly this is the time period that we want. We can, after airing the campaign, we can definitely understand the reach, recall, understanding of the campaign that we do after the campaign has been is put on air, or it has been conducted in the villages or in the field, wherever we want to do it. We definitely do the immediate reach, recall, the study, to understand to what extent it has reached to the people, to understand people have heard it, understood it. But to what extent it reflects in the change in attitude and behavior, that's entirely the matter of time. I hope I have answered, not so much, but yes, try to put some rationale behind it. Kanika, do you want to add to this?
I could actually, from the case study that I mentioned, what Sujata is saying absolutely correct, because we also face the same thing, that it's really difficult to determine a time to when behavior can change, but behavior basically changes when the gap between the intention to action is completed. So it's basically to say, it could, for some people who are early adopters, take a month, but for some who are late adopters who require a nudge and follow-ups, it could take a year. So yeah, so I would say, rather than associating it to like minutes or hours or years as a time value, it's mostly when that gap of intention to action is fulfilled. That's pretty much.
So behavior change takes time, is what we are saying, right? Okay. Thank you so much, Sujata and Kanika. Now I have a question specifically for Kanika, and it's, how can ICT be used in overcoming barriers to behavior change? Kanika.
Sure. I will give a very short answer. It's all like, ICT can be used effectively to overcome barriers to behavior change if we are ensuring a pull-based approach rather than a push-based approach. So rather than, I think, again, similar to what Sujata also said, rather than going with a pre-bias of what will work, we need to do, as per research, do like a thorough understanding, a needs assessment of exactly what the community or the beneficiary wants, and then go ahead and design the product or the behavior change campaign accordingly, because otherwise it just would not work. So rather than assuming, we need to go on the field and test our and user test, basically. So I would say that that's the easy answer. I'll also address one of the questions actually very shortly on the Q&A bit by Judith. Thanks for that question. So I would say the answer can be two ways. So the question for everyone is, how do you make ICT inclusive in cases where half the population gets ICT and the other half does not? So even in the research that I touched upon, other half did not have access to ICT. So I would say it could be one, digital facilitation. So these days there are a lot of technology assisted models for behavior change. So when you have to do an awareness campaign, can, like, if one person in, for example, a village has access to a netbook or a mobile phone, can that be used as a means for ensuring that everyone else gets the same information? So digitally facilitated models can help. And the other one could be exploring other means of communication. For example, this one thing in Kenya worked, uh, which is USSD, works really massively, has picked up so much through M-Pesa, which is basically like transferring money through messages, right? And the same thing has actually not picked up in other global south contexts like in India. So the thing basically here is that we need to, in such cases where half of the population does not have access to ICT, just understand and explore all means of communications. Does radio work better than messages? Does messages work better than ATMs? So basically looking at all the landscape of ICT that is available and seeing what is the perfect mix can help. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Kanika. So again, that question of ensuring that we bridge the divide in access to ICT, it's very a pertinent issue that we must actually think further on how to make sure that everyone has access and devise measures to ensure that those who can't access the information via ICT are still accessing it via other ways as well. We have a question for Khalib. Khalib, in terms of behavior change and climate risks, what are some barriers of behavioral change in climate change mitigation?
Thank you, Charmaine. Yeah, for the talk that I had, mainly I would say, like I've indicated in the figure, access to credit and insurance, and also based on from what other studies have indicated, the access to these markets, credit and insurance, basically determines how people behave or how climate risk contributes to behavior formation. For instance, in one of my studies, access to micro insurance in Ethiopia has a significant effect in reducing risk aversion, which means it also contributed to the uptake of high risk, high return agricultural practices. So if these kind of markets are accessible to the context of farming or agriculture, so it would encourage farmers to take a risk and try, maybe it could be hybrid seeds or mineral fertilizers or other technologies that could be risky, but at the same time, that results higher yield and higher income. Even if the weather is not suitable, and even if they fail, because they may have something they can rely on, like credit and insurance. The payout from the insurance might help them to smooth their consumption, so they will not lose in terms of falling into poverty. So I would say access to this kind of markets and the lack of access of these markets are a significant barrier. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Khalib. But I also had a question, because right now we're speaking in terms of farmers responding to climate risks, but there is also the reverse of it as well, like what farmers can do to try and mitigate, the impacts on climate change as well. I think that is also a discourse on its own, like, so we just don't respond, but we are also very proactive in what we do as well, like talk about sustainable farming practices by farmers as well, to make sure that we are also doing our part to the environment. Thank you, Khalib. We have further questions for Sujata and Kanika. So the first question is, do we apply the human-centered design for SBCC research to know insights, the level of understanding? I'm not sure I understand the question though, but you guys can also check it out. Or perhaps the person who posed the question can perhaps rephrase so that we have an understanding of what exactly they want to know here in terms of social behavior change. Whilst waiting for that, there's another question, and it's, how do we measure behavior change when we know the decision making to adopt or adopt is based on the perceived benefits of technology, culture, and other complex mechanisms such as age, gender, experience, socioeconomic status?
Sure, I can answer that. So definitely, like whenever there is any intervention programs, the level of understanding, in fact, it's among ourselves as well. So the level of understanding is different among different people. For that matter, what we have done as per the experience that I have had, so mainly the knowledge attitude practice is the approach that we generally apply. to measure the behavior change. In fact, before the knowledge, attitude, and practice comes the awareness. So awareness is something that you hear, but you don't really have the in-depth knowledge about it. But then after the campaign, maybe then you realize that, yes, these are the things that that's a benefit of practicing whatever has been the message has been conveyed to the campaign. And then there are different environmental, like I described, the sociological model that plays an important role in changing the attitude of the people. Like it's written like that, we know that the decision making to adopt is based on the perceived benefit of technology, culture, and other complex mechanisms such as age, gender, experience, socioeconomic status. So these the different interplay, it actually plays an important role in changing the attitude, and then it reflects on the behavior, but not necessarily, it is always not the case. This is this relation is always not a linear thing, that the change in knowledge, attitude, and then there is change in behavior. You may have the knowledge, but because of the surrounding conditions or the circumstances, there may not be any change in the attitude. Or you may have the knowledge, you may have the right attitude, but you may not practice that particular right behavior. So for example, a woman in the reproductive age group, she may have the knowledge that yes, antenatal care is important. She may have the attitude to go for antenatal care, but because the family is not supportive, it's not getting reflected in the behavior. So these are really different permutation combinations that we have, and we try to understand these linkages and the networks, and then try to also like with the qualitative as well as the quantitative data collection, because quantitative we really get the answer of what, how, but exactly why, and to understand those nuances we really need to do the qualitative and get and try to understand the behavior change. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sujata, for that. I hope that gives clarity to the question.
I could also answer the other question on human-centered design. I think I briefly understand it before you continue. So probably the simple answer is yes, human-centered design is extremely crucial for having social behavior change communication in place. And that's exactly, I think we did touch upon it when we mentioned that user testing is important. We did touch upon it when we mentioned that the approach needs to be pull-based, because having the person who has to adapt to the behavior change has to be central to any awareness or communication campaign that needs to be built. So so I would say that having a participatory approach to it, ensuring that human is actually at the center of the communication in this in any design of the research is extremely important. So the answer is yes.
Thank you so much, Kanika, for that. But it seems that our time is a bit limited now for me to take any more questions. But I would like to take this opportunity to thank our panelists for such engaging presentations and the discussions as well. Thank you so much, everyone. And I would also like to thank our attendees for continuing to show up and supporting us through this Includovate thought series moving forward as well. Thank you so much, everyone, and may you all enjoy your day further. And bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.